One, good to see everyone. Um, at the last HEF, or one of the HEF meetings, I did a presentation on the results of the consultation to the Sector Net Zero project. That was the sort of the results of the survey and the round table discussions setting out what organizations thought about in terms of where they were in the journey, the barriers they were finding, and some of the support they needed. And at the last of one of these meetings that I attended, I don't think it was the last one, the one before, I gave an update and was saying that we were looking to develop a heritage carbon literacy course. So that is what we've done. And in fact, that was Liz's, probably, I think it was your first meeting here or your second meeting here, and you sort of then got in contact with me, said, yes, I'd like to be involved in help and support, which has been fantastic. And just to give the background is, we're thinking about the sort of the second phase of the next couple of years of support for heritage organisations. So that is, those organisations that provide heritage services like archaeological organisations, conservation, and also those that manage heritage sites. So it's sort of the full gambit of heritage organisations. And the main sort of 4 or 5 areas, I'm just having a quick look of where the support's been identified and where we need to, and this is, none of this is sort of in play yet, apart from what we're about to talk to today. Is one is rolling out carbon literacy training for heritage organisations. The second one is looking at supporting some carbon accounting. So a lot of organisations who are starting there, trying to find out how to measure their footprint, things like that, and actually getting down to writing an action plan. A lot of it is people have been asking about some sort of tailored resources, some case studies, some examples, so they can learn from others, because it's much easier when they see another organisation has done something, they can then sort of look at that and work that way. One of the big ones is signposting. And it's very much this whole thing about, there's so much information out there, it's just a minefield, but actually what information is useful, where can they find it, what do they trust? And that's very much been working, and for the museum and cultural heritage sector and the Roots and Branches project, we've been talking to them about this, because it's that sort of the next stage for them, how can they work out some better signposting, and then thinking about development of peer-to-peer sharing of experience. So sort of people can come along, I did this, I did that, this is a good example, things like that. So those are sort of the main 5 areas. So really just going back to the carbon literacy training course, this is very much, it is based directly on the museum carbon literacy course that was developed by the Roots and Branches project and the Manchester University and the Northwest Museum Regional Museum Development team. So we've spoken to them, we've taken that course, we've had permission to take a course, and basically it's being tailored to suit more heritage, broader heritage organisations, rather than just having the sort of the focus on the examples directly on museums. So really that's where the context is, and Liz is going to talk through a bit more about what we're doing and what help we need with it.
Right, thank
you.
you.
Okay, Liz?
You're done, Dan. Well done. You can turn your camera off and drink your tea now. Hello, everyone. So the reason that I spammed Dan after hearing him talk about the need for carbon literacy after that first meeting I came to was because I come from the museum sector. I'm a carbon literacy trained trainer, and I'd previously trained everybody who worked in my previous organisation. So when I'd arrived here at Historic Buildings and Places, I got permission from Carbon Literacy Trust to use the museum toolkit to train my team, and they'd granted me this permission because they owed me lots of favours, as I'd done lots of promotion for them. And so when Dan said, "Oh, I'm thinking of doing this," I dropped him an email and went, "Already doing it, mate. You might want to see what I'm up to." And he was able to therefore come and join in that training, and then we've been working together on it since then. So I don't know if by show of little yellow wavy hands, you can show me, has anybody done a carbon literacy training before, or anybody carbon literacy trained here? A few people Fab. I think we've got 3. Fantastic. 4. Very good. Oh, Dan, I should think so too. And does anybody know anything about it? I want to know if I'm preaching to the converted or the mildly interested. Showing little yellow hands. Anybody know anything about it? A few do. Okay, a few more than have been trained. Excellent. Yes. Excellent. Joe's developed the course for the Church of England. I imagine, so all the carbon literacy courses have different flavours. Basically, think of it as an ice cream shop. So you have a local authority one, a football one, like a sports one, and now we're developing kind of a suite around heritage and culture as well. And so this will be the heritage version of the course. It'll be interesting, Joe, to see how different it is from your Church of England course. I think it might have lots of similarities, as they all have the same basic framework. So what I'm going to do for you today is just show you and give you an idea of what the training course is going to look like, because as always I'm here with some professional needs. We have lots of case studies that we talk about in the course, and what we want to try and get is a whole suite of different examples that our trainers will be able to pull from depending on the organisation. So if you're working with a public opening, building and site, you might pick one set of case studies. If you're working with a sector support organisation, it'd be another one. If you're working with the archaeological sector, it might be another one. So we have got some of those case studies and examples already, but your thinking caps, while I just show you what we do, is what other case studies could you recommend? Maybe you've got ones from your own organisations, maybe you've got some really good case studies you would like to throw at us. Don't worry, we don't have to remember everything now. You can drop us an email after, but that would be incredibly helpful. Also, while we're talking about it, it might be worth thinking about how your organisation might helpfully get involved, or how it might want to use the carbon literacy, and how we're going to kind of roll it out to different people. So you think, oh, this would be really helpful for my organisation. So just to let you know, carbon literacy is not about people who already know everything about the climate emergency. It's not for people working in this area. It's not even just for the people in the organisation's green group. It really is a really basic introduction, because to solve the climate emergency, what we need is people who know nothing to do something. And so this training it's action based. We're working towards actions at the end. And it is about taking that initial knowledge from nothing to something. So sometimes, oh, Dan says he will give an update later. Thank you, Dan. Sometimes if you've got specialists within your organisation, this is not going to be the course for them. This is the course for the people who are working at a very general level. Maybe they don't feel that you know, working towards a net zero is part of their job role at all, but of course it needs to be everybody's job if we're going to achieve it. So I'm going to share my screen. I am not going to show you 4 million zillion slides. The whole slideshow is actually 120 slides. It takes a day, and we split it over 2 days, and it will be online. But what I want to show you is just kind of a taster of what you get in carbon literacy, and show you where we need that help. So I'm not going to put it on full screen, because otherwise I'll get a bit lost as to where I am. So the course comes in 4 different modules. Introduction, a bit about the science and impact is module 1, module 2 and module 3 and module 4. So I'm going to show you a bit about all of those modules. The course actually starts with a bit of homework. People have to watch a BBC documentary about the climate emergency before the course starts, and that's a really good introduction. Make sure everybody is on that right page. The whole way through, the course involves conversations, it involves activities, it involves little online activities as well as you go through. So it's not just the trainer, which has been me quite a lot of times, talking for a whole day, you'll be pleased to know. So we do a bit of the basic basic science, we're definitely talking below GCSE level here, which is helpful for me, but it's really important that we all get an understanding of what the greenhouse gases are and why we refer to them all as carbon dioxide, even though that's not scientifically correct. It involves various gases. So carbon dioxide equivalents. It's a bit about understanding the language, which I think is super helpful. A lot of people I've worked with, it's so confusing, isn't it? Just to try and get the right words for everything, and you feel like you're going to get it wrong. So we start with a bit of the basic science. And we start straight away to talk about how the climate change will impact heritage. And this is just a conversation starter slide. So lots of people, once they get thinking, can already think of good examples where their own organisations are being impacted at many different levels. And, you know, we could put 100 things up here, I think, actually, but this is a good place to start that conversation off, and then people really get talking and thinking critically, because what we don't want is anyone to go, oh well, you know, my organisation, oh we're not really, oh no, it won't be us. And as I always say to people, you know, policy is not going to say in brackets, don't worry about it, heritage, and the world is not going to heat up or change its climate, and it's going to say, oh, don't worry, we'll avoid all the heritage buildings though, you'll be fine. So it involves everyone and everything. So that is that's usually about 2 hours worth in module 1. Module 2, this is where we really start to think about the role of heritage, but also climate justice and co-benefits. And this is really important to give it kind of a real social grounding as to the role of all the carbon policies and why it's really important that we as organisations strive to meet deadlines and opportunities as they come up. So I'm going to give you a bit of a flavour here. So we talk about, again, this is a conversation starter. What role can heritage have? And I'd like to think that heritage, people think it's about the past, but usually we're leading the way. And I can see that this is an area in which we can set best practice as well. So that's the conversation that we will have around the role of heritage. Now, this is your first thinking cap moment, please. In the museums toolkit, which is direct kind of translation of, there's a section about can heritage and culture support climate justice? Museums in their version, and they have 4 examples of museums working with different kind of climate justice organisations. I would love to have a heritage example about how a heritage organisation is supporting climate justice. Now, is the caveat to your thinking, for those of you who've been quick-fingered or quick-brained on this one, I would like it not to be the National Trust, not because I don't love the National Trust, I just use them as an example later on. And I am also trying to make sure that all the way through the course, we have small organisations, big organisations. You know, this is a course that needs to work across our sector, but particularly with small grassroots organisations, and often presenting some of our biggest sector members as the gold standard can be a bit intimidating. So can we think of any heritage or culture support for climate justice that's not a museum and it's not the National Trust? So thinking caps on that one, please. And that climate justice is really thinking about organisations that are working to achieve climate justice, particularly between what we call the global north and the global south. And so those are the countries that are least responsible for the climate emergency being most affected by the climate emergency. That's the kind of the area we are talking about. Okay, so then we go through a whole section talking about examples of organisations that are working or have done work around the climate emergency, around adaptation, learning, training, and it's thinking about the co-benefits that that organisation has. So of course it's good for the planet, but often that is not going to sell it up to our trustees, is it? Just saying, oh, it's going to save the world. That's not going to cut the mustard. So actually thinking about in different organisations, how does it also fit in with the mission for attributing financial savings? We all love that one. Reputation, partnership and audiences that you might be bringing in. So you can see here I've still got a museum example. I have got lots of sector examples, but I would like lots more. So they need to just be projects that have already been undertaken by a heritage organisation, or a continuing piece of work that is undertaken by a heritage organisation, that we can then think about what the co-benefits are for that organisation. Let me give you some examples I've got. This is a case study. Luckily, we've got tons of case studies online, haven't we? So this is a bit of work done by Thanet Council about retrofitting Victorian homes. There's one from my colleagues at SPAB talking about their database of knowledge. One about retrofitting a local authority headquarters in York. Historic houses, I think you're here today. I've given you a bit of a plug here for your sustainability awards. I think they're a really good example of all the different ways that that brings co-benefits to your organisation, as well as being really good for the climate emergency work. This is the National Trust property project. This is the big end of the scale. Us, the HEF itself, talking about how our cross-sector collaboration and all the co-benefits that has for us. And then there's one on sustainable digital engagement. And we do talk about the fact that digital is not completely green. There is a carbon cost of digital. But again, that's another good example. So I would love some more examples of organisations, work, projects. So any ideas you might have, something you'd love to flag up, something you'd like included in the course, please do let us know. So that is, in a nutshell, module 2. That usually takes half a day. And then we actually stop and go away. It's quite intense, this course, so we don't like to do it in a whole big one slam, because I think it's a bit much for most people. You need to do a lot of thinking about things that maybe you don't normally want to think about. So module 3 and module 4 are done in a second half day. When I'm training, I usually do it about a week later. So module 3, we go over the policy position, carbon footprints and low carbon heritage, so introducing that idea. We don't do tons on carbon footprints, we just do a bit, and that's one of the reasons that Dan is thinking about like a separate provision for carbon footprints, because, you know, I can imagine people doing the carbon literacy and then going, right, well, one of the actions I want to do now is to sort out our carbon footprint, and how do I do that? So that will be included. So we do everything right from the very top level policy. So looking at different reports, and that this is information is always as up to date as possible. Looking at the international sustainability goals, and I think this is always a really interesting way of viewing the world, that maybe we don't always look at heritage through these kind of lenses, but actually the moment you look at it and start talking about it, you see how much work that we're actually kind of all doing in these areas. And then we start talking about the carbon footprint. Now, this is a graphic that we have from the Arts Council, and it is for the cultural sector. Me and Dan would love to be proved wrong, but we don't think we have the equivalent information for just the heritage sector. I don't think that we've been collecting that information in the same way. This has been collected through the National Portfolio of Organisations. It's part of their grant giving agreement that they give all this information back, which is why they had this lovely graphic. But we think it applies across, and so it will give, you know, give participants an idea. But if you happen to be sat on the equivalent for the heritage sector, again, please let us know. We'd love to have it. And then we actually get to, what does a low carbon heritage organisation look like? And so this is starting to really get people thinking about what their organisation might look like in the future, and what action they will need to take individually to get it there. So again, I've got lots of examples, and I would love some more. I particularly would like examples of organisations that are very small, so kind of micro or small heritage organisations that have been doing work in this area. It doesn't need to be perfect, it doesn't need to be finished, but we'd like some more examples put in there. Again, maybe some middle-sized places as well, and I'm also trying to make sure we've got a split from across the sector, so it's not all support organisations and it's not all public opening organisations. So again, we get that suite of case studies. So let me show you what I've got so far. And I should say that with this slide deck for a trainer comes an enormous training manual, which contains loads more information about each of these case studies, kind of behind the scenes. So this is kind of the top level information, and there's tons more to be referred to. Oh, that's a rather lovely looking little charity there. That must be us, talking about our renewable energy. So we're really small. So, you know, we're a good small example. Talked about the cafe at Blenheim Palace. They've got a lovely case study about their cafe online. What have we got? So English heritage, the big end. I don't want too many case studies of kind of action plans, because that feels like you know, people can write things, but actually I like things in action. But it's good to show one there, even if it isn't showing the activity as much. Talked about biodiversity at Historic Royal Palaces. Again, quite a big organisation, but I love the biodiversity angle on that one. A small organisation, another small organisation, and another one, but I think I've got too many museums. So I would love to change some of those for wider heritage organisations. This one's about making a heritage site cycle friendly, but it doesn't have an actual site attached to it. So again, I'd love some more site specific. If somebody runs an open air heritage site and has been doing anything to make their site more environmentally friendly, I'd love that as an example. And this one here is about archives and passive environmental control. Again, something that is really important. In this section as well, during this module, we also, oh, I've suddenly gained an echo. If somebody hasn't popped themselves on mute. Thank you. So in this section as well, we also talk about what can be done to make a workplace, a house and a listed building more sustainable. And so we actually go through those examples, which I think will be really important, because we know some of the very grassroots organisations are not quite sure even where to start. So we go through that in module 3 as well. And then module 4. Module 4 is actually looking at the activities. So when somebody does a carbon literacy course, they end it by making 2 pledges. A pledge as an individual for the actions they will make, and a pledge as a group action they will take. The idea of that is it's a positive action that you take, but also for an organisation, the more people pledging 1 or 2 actions, then the bigger impact the carbon literacy course starts to have. And then you start to see the backbones of a policy or a plan, bringing all these actions together. And in a larger organisation, it's often quite helpful, because you'll get people who maybe haven't considered what action they could take in their own particular area, and they will focus on that. And we do quite a lot in module 4 about those actions, but also about what those actions are not. So we talk about greenwashing, we talk about focusing on plastics too much, and we talk about the broader picture, and things like actually changing your pension provider can be one of the most impactful things you can do. Can you influence that? You know, can you make that happen as an organisation? This is not a course about making people feel guilty and terrible and not able to live their life. It's positive and uplifting, and making sure we emphasise the changes they can make. So at the end of it, they come up with an individual action and a group action. The other thing we talk about in module 4, which I feel might be quite useful in our sector, is about how we have those conversations, particularly if those conversations are difficult, which they often are, because we're weighing up the merits of preservation, a long-term future. We're maybe people that don't fully believe that the changes to the climate is entirely man-made. all of those things, we talk about how you could discuss them, and that's really important because we want to encourage people to go out and have those conversations. So we try and equip them with some of the skills that they will have. So once the course is done, then everyone takes a week or so to write up their actions, and then they are all submitted to the Carbon Literacy Trust, and if they pass, if they're considered substantial actions and a good understanding of the course, then you are carbon literacy certified. So that is the course. So hopefully you remember those areas that I am after. Some examples. I'm after examples of projects. I'm after examples of ones where a different type of projects where we can talk about the impacts they can have on the whole organisation, and we're after examples of climate justice. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and ask Dan, what have I missed out from my long list of things I was going to talk about?
Oh, yeah, I'm just thinking, I've just put one in as an examples of the projects with images and copyright.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So if anyone's got anything with that, and if there any of the, you know, if the images could be used and things like that would be really useful.
Or if you've got a good example and you would you know, you think, oh, I've heard of this project, I don't know anything about them, send it through, we'll research it, we'll get in touch with them. Like we're prepared to do the digging, because the more examples that we have from a range of organisations, the better the course will be. So does anybody want to share any good ideas that they've got now, or want to feedback anything to us? I'm afraid I haven't been able to keep an eye on the messages as I was talking.
Thanks, Liz. No, that was really useful. We've got quite a few examples listed in the chat, actually. So I don't know whether you want to kind of have a look at those now or take those away and have to think about those. But there are a couple of things and kind of key points that have been
Let me just have a little look. Yes. So Jo, we talk about personal footprints as well. In this course, we'll have a section on personal footprints because it's something that people are really fascinated in. But also, I think that the key to understanding organizational building carbon footprints is your own one. Once you've worked it out for yourself, and you know, obviously we give some online tools to do that, then it shows you it's not that hard actually, and you just need a bit of information to plug in, and the resources online will churn you out an estimate of your carbon footprint. So yeah, we talk about people a bit as well, but one of the things I'm keen for the heritage course to make clear is that this is not a matter of personal preference. You know, for a lot of us in our organisations, this is part of our work, and so we want to make sure that people are motivated by that, which is slightly different from the church as well. We can try and do it on a professional level as well as a personal level. Let me scroll up the people adding things in. Yes, I've stolen many case studies from Heritage Responds.
Great, good to know.
Yeah, it's really good. We've got so many great case studies as a sector. What we don't have so many of are small organisations. So there might be, I know lots of people here represent you know, our sector support organisation themselves. Maybe within your membership there are smaller organisations that we could highlight and that we could show kind of case studies of, because obviously if you're talking about maybe some volunteers looking after a particular property or site, they're probably not going to be uploading that all to a website or putting it into the case studies. So the case studies always tend to be the biggest organisations. Is there any questions?
Oh, there is.
Fergus.
Oh, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, yeah. Hi, Liz. Hi, Dan. Yeah, thanks ever so much. Really interesting presentation. So we work with a wide range of organisations, Fit Future Network, as you can imagine, the big ones. We are sort of a national trust project and lots and lots of units. I think it's really interesting that we found quite a challenging part of the year is trying to get case studies from the smaller organisations. I feel because they feel perhaps a lack of confidence, thinking actually what we're doing is not good enough. And we always try to break through and say, no, absolutely not. The work you're doing on the ground is fantastic, and you don't have to provide a perfect case study of all the answers as well. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to go back, because we're always looking for case studies. So I'd be really happy to go back to the network and ask some case studies for this as well, and to put quite a strong focus on some of the smaller organisations, because we get quite a few organisations coming through from National Lottery Heritage Fund and Architectural Heritage Fund doing great stuff. So it'd be really good to make sure they're represented. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to go to that. I think it's lack of confidence sometimes from the smaller ones, but say, no, what you're doing is fantastic. It doesn't need to be perfect.
It doesn't need to be perfect. And the other thing to emphasize is you don't have to have done every single part of your organization. Like if there's a small thing that you've done, like recycling bins, right? Say all an organization has done is sort out its recycling or its rubbish collection, like fantastic. Like don't worry about the fact you haven't got a policy and everything else. That will all calm. Like, but I think sometimes for a small organization we should really celebrate those small activities, because they all build up. And they will head towards having everything. I think the same is true about people feeling, oh, we can't share what we've done because we haven't mapped our carbon footprint, or we haven't done a baseline, and Dan's thinking about how we're going to help people do that. But again, I think that can be a barrier to showing off. And we don't want any showing off barriers. So maybe this is a very gentle way that we could highlight some of those examples. Thank you, Fergus. That'd
Really
be great.
keen to catch up beyond this and see how we can sort of raise the profile, so maybe get some case studies your way. Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. Thank you. Oh, it numbers now. That's great, isn't it? Ruth.
Hello. Thanks for that. I think that sounds great, and we've certainly been developing our own kind of approach to carbon literacy in English heritage, but I think this sounds fantastic. So thank you. And we have a number of examples that we can feed in as well. I want to know just around the actions that people sign up to at the end, and that process of sort of using that as a sort of feedback loop to then refining the course. Is that something that will be done? Because I can imagine the sort of actions, not prejudging, the sort of actions you might get, and then sort of moving that conversation on, and the opportunity within the course to have some of the conversations around heritage and what's immediately thought of as sustainability around sort of renewables and conservation principles, and how you leave space for those conversations. So sorry, two questions.
No. So that's something that me and Dan are talking about quite a lot, about how we're going to create, basically what we're talking about is being able to have shared knowledge across the trainers, so that if we can spot reoccurring themes coming up, conversations coming up, and then we can adjust things accordingly. We haven't quite worked out how we're going to do that yet, have we, Dan? But we know we need to. The other thing that we're quite keen to do is, so when you make the pledges at the end, pledge an individual action and a group action. That's not the group of people in the meeting, that's an action you will take as part of a group. That makes sense. And you pledge, you estimate how much carbon you feel that would save. It needs to be substantial and impactful, and it also needs to be new. And so one thing we're thinking about is how we can gather that information. So at the end of, say, a year of running the course, we can say participants have pledged to save this much carbon. Look how impactful it has been, as well as picking up. So if everyone is pledging to get rid of plastic spoons, we're not doing the course right, because we have a whole section on actually plastic is a kind of a bit of a red herring in this conversation. If everyone's pledging to go talk about their pension providers and to look at their waste disposal processes and their procurement processes, then we're probably doing it right. So we're trying to work out how to keep an eye on all of that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think if it could sort of feed into that picture for the heritage sector, similar to the cultural sector, that would be really nice, wouldn't it? Because it's such a strong infographic and message as well.
I feel like we're having so many conversations about data at the moment, which makes us sound techie and nerdy, but like actually having pulling this course together has kind of highlighted for me where our data holes are as a sector.
I think a lot of the that evaluation is because the real focus of this course is like to support behaviour change, in organisations, and actually in evaluating behaviour change and how and what that impact is something that's really interesting, and we're trying to work on that one. But yeah, it's a really useful, Ruth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was brilliant. So I thought that was a great presentation, and it looks like fantastic training, and everyone should be doing this. That's really good. I suppose it's an observation, really, in many ways. I mean, you drew that comparison with the Arts Council and how much, further advanced perhaps they are in terms of gathering metrics and data. But yeah, so I suppose my plea would be that at historic houses, we are representing, hundreds and hundreds of privately owned heritage sites. The majority of them wouldn't regard themselves necessarily as organisations, because sometimes they are an individual private owner with perhaps 2 or 3 people, a gardener perhaps, or someone who looks after the house or whatever, but they probably wouldn't regard themselves as an organisation. So thinking about this in terms of organisations may be less helpful for them. I'm thinking of how I can sell this to my members, someone living in a medium-sized historic house somewhere in the depths of the country, for whom this might be of some interest, but they won't be an organisation, they won't be a charity. Only a small number of our places are charities. I wondered, for example, on your examples, I think all of them were charities. I'm not sure, but the majority were. Even somewhere like Blenheim is a charity. In fact, that's one of our bigger members. But that is also a charity. And Dominic at Blenheim is really inspiring on this agenda. He's obviously set the organisation off on a big net zero mission. And that was sorry, I'm hogging the camera here, but my other question was about visitor travel, because he counts visitor travel in his net zero ambitions, which is very ambitious. I'm not sure that one of my medium-sized house owners in Staffordshire wouldn't know where to begin, and they might be turned off by talk of climate justice. They might simply want to know what can they do to make a difference. And they want to know why making a difference matters to them, rather than, that sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think 2 things. First off, I think that we can have a separate conversation about how we might have to think about making a private owner flavoured ice cream to go in the selection of ice creams, because that is something that I have been aware of, and that there are issues around that are purely property based that are slightly separate. So we can have that conversation. Maybe you, me and Dan could have a chat another point about that. I think reaching private owners is incredibly important and incredibly difficult, and maybe I see a future where we work together on that, and try and put on something bespoke for those private owners. And I had an answer to your second bit, which I've immediately forgotten. Scope 3. Visitor travel. Personally, I think it is so difficult to try and think about your visitors. It is much easier for going back to the Arts Council and their NPOs, right? When a visitor comes into a museum and they get funding from the Arts Council, they literally have to ask them how they got there. That's how they work out their scope 3 kind of emissions for their carbon footprints. I think for most organisations, if you can do your scope 1 and 2, then you're doing brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. And I think as Barack Obama would say, we shouldn't let perfect get in the way of good, right? So I think scope 3 is perfect, and if we can get scope 1 and 2, it's good. Frankly, at the moment, sorry Dan, Dan has not approved this speech. I think we are so low on people's understanding, knowledge and input and interest in this, that frankly, if they come to a carbon literacy course, I'd be flipping delighted, because actually most of us, and I include myself before I got involved in this work, have our head in the sand pretending it's not going to happen. So I think suddenly saying, oh well, you need to calculate the footprint of everyone who arrives on your site or your staff, or like how they get, like it's just too much. I think we need to ease people in. So that would be, you know, I don't think that's just private owners, actually. I think that's most people in heritage. I think start gently, and then you can start to think about it, and you can say as an organisation, we have not calculated our scope 3 because it's only 2 volunteers and a cat, and we can't do it. It's too hard, and that doesn't take away from the good of everything else.
I totally agree, and I'd love to have a conversation about how to sell this to my members, because I'd love to be able to do that, and that would be fantastic to get a private owner version of all this as well. So thank you so much.
Fab. Okay.
Brilliant.
Right, I'll take a note for us to set up to chat to Ben then, shall I, Dan?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Fab, thank you. Sue.
Yeah, morning. Absolutely fascinating, and I think some really great content. Just a question, really. You rightly focus on carbon emissions. Does the course include anything about carbon sequestration and natural capital, sort of biodiversity?
No, it doesn't. So it is very much a beginner's entry level. So it's 1 working day's worth of crash course. So it is very much the simplest level. That kind of more intense stuff, I know Harriet in Dan's team has been thinking about more for like the Historic England staff members. I did their online pilot and I was like, oh, GCSE level, you're blowing my mind. But no, this is very, very simple introduction.
There's elements where it broadens out from the just carbon to environmental sustainability. There's stuff on, you know, improving other aspects, but it's not focusing on that.
No.
Biodiversity, super. For example, it's there but not focused.
Sounds like it'd be a wonderful extra course.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's a bit of a missed trick, because everyone, all of us know if you plant a tree, it's good for the environment.
Yeah,
that's as basic a level we're at. And that's true, but you know, there's lots of properties that will have extensive parklands, and it's about slight tweaks to management. You know, mowing grass less will be better for biodiversity. You get a carbon saving from the emissions of the lawnmower. You get a cost saving. You get boosted biodiversity. There's loads of little tick boxes, and I think going forward, you know, we all could do a lot more with our landscape. And particularly sort of organisations that have got gardens as well, and looking at water scarcity and changing the plant species, and you know, it's more than a 1-day course. I appreciate. But
it sounds like it might be worth having a slide pointing towards those things, Dan, as part of it. That would be very easy to do. So like the one about greening your we have a greening your home and business, and then we have a greening your listed building, and we could have a greening your site as a third slide in that.
Exactly.
Park and garden.
Yeah. Okay, Sue, could I follow up with you to see what I might put on that slide?
yeah, absolutely, no problem.
Great.
Super, thanks guys.
Cheers. Great idea.
Thanks both, that was brilliant, absolutely fascinating.
Go on, Dan. Sorry, very quick update of sort of like, so this course is being created. We are now, as part of it, we're trying to this sort of thing is creating a framework of trainers to roll out the course, and the idea, so rather than having just a single contract for a trainer to go and do X amount of courses, we're creating this framework, which means it'll have a number of trainers will be able to come along and trying to create a sort of collaborative space where we can work together. So as well as supporting heritage organisations, it's actually part of sort of how can we support the sector train itself. So that's what we're creating in the moment, the framework. And the idea will be to roll out training for Historic England staff, and then it's what I am doing is with the heritage organisations. We're looking to do that over the next couple of years, and I'm trying to work out money and courses, but we're looking at quite a few courses. And then what we're thinking of doing is that the sector representative bodies, a number of them which are here, would be able to say, I would like to run 5 courses, 10 courses for my members, and then we will be able to provide the trainers to be able to do that. So it's just kind of working out that relationship of that. So that's the idea. So these courses will be available, and we were looking to be able to work in partnership with you know, HEF members and seeing how we can best roll this out. It's a bit like what Ben was talking about. How can we actually do that? And thinking about it. So that's the stage we're at. So it's creating the framework for trainers, and it's then sorting out the mechanism for being able to deliver training over the next 18 months to 2 years. I'm trying to work out how many organisations we'd like to do, and how we can be, you know, quite aspirational and things like that. And this is very much working with the, you know, can we work in partnership with, say, the museum teams as well, and see how we can sort of work across that. So that gives people an idea.
There's also the ability for individuals to become trained trainers within their organisation. So, you know, actually through the carbon literacy to get that kind of training qualification, that works well for some large organisations. And I think ideally it would be good to kind of group the same similar-ish organisations together, because then I think you'll have the same sort of questions. So, you know, Ben was talking about private owners, so for sector support organisations, for example. So because I'm one of the outstandingly brilliant amenity societies, I'm going to offer to train all my fellow amenity societies, and I'm going to do that for free for them because I'm a trained trainer and I like them. I think that would be a good way of doing it, but we are kind of a little bit making this up as we go along. But if there's a particular group that you think we've overlooked or haven't thought about, like, shout, this is the time to come and talk to us about what we can add in or make it right.
Great. Thanks both, really useful, and I'm happy to, while I'm still here for the next 3 weeks, to kind of filter any communication between the group and you, and then the HEF team will be there to support with any way we can, really, to help roll out, because I think it's a fantastic idea and there's obviously a lot of interest in doing it. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, so one of the things we're talking about is potentially offering the training to the HEF team.
Before I go, please.
Yeah, we are. That's sorry, that's a very good point. I've totally forgot about that. What we'd like to do is maybe roll out as a pilot, or the first one. I think Liz is going to do it to HEF members, so people who are here or members of their colleagues, as to sort of get a bit of feedback, and then see also as partly as a promotional event to show the value of it, and then be able to promote it out to their members. So we will talk to everyone about that later, and see